you have spoken to Gen Z, many of them here tonight, by the way. Right. I don't know if you spoke to them. How many of you spoke to Jon for the... Okay, you'll get to that. That's crazy.
Turn this into a focus group, maybe?
This is a focus group. Is that how you do it? Is it, how do you get to Gen Z? I have 2 of them in my house, and I don't know what they think about anything.
Yeah. They want to be listened to. It's actually quite easy. You can bring a group of young people together, and I ask a couple simple questions. Do you feel understood? No. What do you think people like me don't understand about you? And then there we go for 2 hours. It's actually quite easy.
Can I tell you something? That is the plot of The Breakfast Club. So is this mostly focus groups? Are these checklists and surveys that you pass out? How is this done?
What we do, and we've been doing this for almost 25 years now at Harvard, right? Because young people 25 years ago were interested in understanding their generation. And to do that well, you need to go beyond traditional polling and asking people what they think, right track, wrong track. You need to spend time, immerse yourself in these communities. We spent a long weekend in Michigan with 25 students or so just a few months ago to begin to understand.
Now, are these people, do you put up a flyer? Or do you put that on?
Well, sometimes we literally go into coffee shops. Sometimes we'll hang up posters asking people if they want to participate in a town hall. Sometimes we'll recruit people based upon certain demographic groups. We'll pay them for a couple of hours.
Do you worry that the sample size is skewed to people who visit coffee shops? Like, how do you adjust for that?
That's just one phase, right? That's the qualitative. And then we learn from those kinds of questions, and we conduct very large-scale surveys of a relatively small population. So whereas most polls across the country might have 1,000 Americans, maybe a couple thousand Americans. We do a couple thousand young people between the ages of 18 to 29 who are representative of that generation across the country. So we learn from conversations and coffee shops and community colleges and online, and then we take those ideas, we learn from what we hear, and we try to quantify that through very large-scale, very rigorous surveys a couple times a year.
And what then do you do with that? How is that? Is that then sent to the media and they use it in a reductionist way that doesn't understand anything that you're talking about to make it seem as though on college campuses all across America, all they talk about is Israel, Gaza? Because I've been on those campuses. All they talk about is getting late in classes.
It depends upon what media outlet we're talking about, right? There are some media outlets who take these headlines and they run them around the world as propaganda to say this generation
in
of
a
Americans,
reductionist manner.
Yeah, to say this generation of Americans are anti-American. You'll see that around the world. So you can use polling as propaganda. This project started because not enough young people were participating in politics. Back in 1996, like when we were young voters, only a third of us voted in the presidential election.
Thank you so much for calling me a young voter in 1996. When I believe I was old enough to have been president. What would you like this to be used for? What is useful in this in your mind? Because it's very difficult to take a snapshot of something and say, this is the picture of this generation, without it being a generality.
This is what's so important, is that I think the goal of this, or the goal of any public opinion research, is to give voice to a generation. To give voice to the vulnerable.
But isn't that TikTok? Isn't that what social... Like, I've never had a more heard generation. I can't get them off my phone.
Yeah. And if you take a moment off of their phone, you know what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you that several days, the last couple of weeks, they were depressed. They're going to tell you some serious concerns they have about their own mental health. And it gets pretty dark in some cases. They're going to tell you that they're not confident that they'll ever be able to do what we did in terms of own a house. They'll tell you that they're concerned about literally being homeless. There's virtually every focus group I do, whether it's virtual or otherwise. Last night, 2 members of a focus group of young people had already been homeless for an extended period of time in their home.
How quickly
and that's what
do
we're
they
trying to do.
reveal these sorts of things?
Within 15, 20 minutes. There was a woman in tears when I simply said, see, this is the difference between kind of what the polling is that you might see, the reductionist polling versus true public opinion research.
Right.
The way I get to this is, I ask 3 questions, okay? The first question is your name, where you're from, what's the best part of your life today? Next question, what keeps you up at night? What are your stressors?
Right.
And then very, very quickly, it gets to the point that they open up. And this is something I think unique about this cohort of younger people, of Gen Zers, that they feel so disconnected from older generations because older generations through the media and otherwise consider them snowflakes, right?
But
and
no generation ever feels connected to the young generation never feels connected to the older generation. That's the whole point. They're here to replace us. Our job is to breed, swim upstream, and then die off.
Right. But what this generation is, they're upfront telling us about these concerns. And I argue that these concerns are more real and visceral than maybe our concerns. I don't think
what would you like our political system or our media system to do with this, other than to come out and go, hey, these guys are worried? Because what we ultimately end up getting, I'll watch the news and just see the Harvard School of Politics Institute did a survey, and the number 1 concern is inflation, and number 15 is Israel-Gaza,
right.
and 14 is emo music. And it'll just give you this list, and there's no illumination there. It's just a list.
What I want elected officials to do, and they are doing it, is to understand these concerns so they can speak to these concerns, because if they speak to these concerns, younger people will be more likely to vote. Not only can they speak to these concerns, but if they could show the track record and the progress that we have made, because, John, this is a different and better country because young people voted in 2020 in record numbers. We don't have KBJ on the Supreme Court. We don't have the largest investment
They voted
climate.
in record numbers in the last one?
In record numbers.
What was the percentage of young people that voted?
If we look at 18 to 29-year-olds, it's the first time in history that more than half voted, 51, 52%.
Really?
On college
Even
campuses,
in Vietnam, the young people didn't vote.
this is higher than any time on record.
Wow.
On college campuses, it was over 60%, which is essentially the same rate as all Americans. And what's interesting about this is not only do we have the highest turnout ever, but also it was the youth vote specifically in those 5 battleground states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Georgia, who by 20 points voted for Biden. Donald Trump won everybody over the age of 44. So it's a young people in particular who are responsible for flipping those states from red to blue and elected Biden.
So if you were young people today and you did that and you overcame that, what has been done for you? Other than some of you, in terms of like loan forgiveness or something along those lines. But do you think that the politicians did honor that vote?
I think so, because let's start with student debt. $150 billion of student debt relief in the last 3 years for over 4 million, soon to be 10 million Americans. That doesn't happen. We don't have, in my opinion, the first bipartisan gun violence prevention act in 2 generations.
So that's just something
people.
You feel like that information just has to be delineated to them, or they're not feeling those effects yet? Or are they disappointed? Is this survey different for young people? Do they feel that they were heard?
No, I think that's the challenge, right? Because what I care most about is participation. Okay, and what drives participation is whether they can see a tangible difference in politics and government in their vote.
Right.
And despite what I believe has been the most pro-youth agenda in several generations from the Biden administration, despite that, few young people appreciate that, right? Few young people know the climate, the gun violence, and student debt forgiveness as examples.
Right.
Right.
Are they thinking about things more immediate to their lives? Is that why they're feeling differently?
Well, I don't think they're watching the news as closely. It's hard to get some of this information in the news. So much what's in the news is a negative, part one. But the other thing is, compared to what the policy preferences are for seniors, like you can feel $2,000 prescription drug cap. You know that. That's immediate, right? You can see in your 401k, right, the record, the kind of the record performance. You can feel that. These things may take a generation to actually feel, with the exception of debt relief.
So wouldn't it make, I wonder if it would make more sense if instead of, if the idea is to make it useful information for people that can be actionable, is the idea maybe to think of this more as a customer survey, the way that a corporation might, to say, what is your satisfaction with the United States government or the government or your life, and what would improve it?
Exactly.
Do they do that?
We essentially do that. We essentially
so it's like
do
a customer service.
It is essentially a customer survey. And I will tell you, it was pretty tricky, very difficult 25 years ago when we started. Okay?
Right.
We have been honored. Inside the RNC, the DNC, our students have briefed the administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration directly. So we are honored because of the work of the young people who craft the questions here that we do have the ear.
And you think there's an understanding now of this? Are you finding the kind of polarization that we see on social media, and is the algorithm driving their opinions in a way that wasn't happening 25 years ago?
Absolutely, and of course, there's no equal side to the algorithm, right? It's.
Is it radicalizing this generation?
I think there's an element of it. For sure, I certainly think there's an element of those people who feel like the backlash, right? Who don't feel connected. The thing about this generation is essentially 2/3 of this generation share a relatively common set of values in terms of what's important for government to focus on and to fight for, right? So if you're a part of that 1/3 who feels disconnected, there is that opportunity, I do think, with these algorithms to go into some pretty dark places.
Where's the disconnect? Is the disconnect from the media, from how the politicians utilize that information, from their own misunderstanding of how the world should listen to them? You know, where is then the disconnect?
I think it's all of the above. I do think that young people, you know, they're used to information quickly, right? They're used to, you know, asking for something and receiving it, you know, in an instant, or being delivered to them, right? So there does need to be, I think, some greater appreciation for the system and the process, part one. But like governments, specifically the government and political parties, need to understand that elections are won and lost based upon what young people think these days. 40% of the electorate are going to be Gen Z or millennials. 40% in this coming election.
When? This election?
This coming election. Gen Z and millennials, okay? They have a shared set of values.
And you write in there that their passion will save this country.
I do think so. I do think so, because as I talked about the severe kind of anxiety and depression that they have, but in many cases, other generations, okay, who feel that way, it's normal to actually, you know, flee, okay, and to run away. But this generation has decided to use all the tools, as David Hogg, the Parkland activist, talks about, in their civic toolbox to fix problems and to stand up for the vulnerable, whether it's voting, whether it's protesting.
Do you really think they're different than past young generations? I mean, that kind of idealism and that kind of activism has always been a part of that, and then everybody gets jobs and says, F it.
Well, listen.
Generally, I mean, that's been my experience. I mean, that's the whole, you know, what happened, the hippies and the yippies turned into the yuppies, and they all went down to Wall Street. And, you know, I feel like we keep getting trapped in this cycle of like, the children are the future, and you're like, yeah, they've been saying that forever, and the cycle keeps repeating as though we didn't also have the potential to do it, but we didn't, and they...
I think, so two things. One is this generation of younger voters voted at twice the level as millennials, Gen Xers.
That's the least
number one.
You can...
But still twice, right? When we were their age, 14, 15% of us voted. Okay.
Now, you know why? We were building a society. We were out in the streets, bricks and mortar, building a society.
And how'd it go? Right?
Not well.
Right? And how'd it go? Right. So that's that is part one. But I am telling you that they are committed. They are committed to dealing with these issues, because I'll tell you why.
Or just the ones you talk to. That's only my curiosity. Because
no, we talk to everybody.
I have two of them.
To everybody.
Oh, you don't talk to me. You didn't talk to my kids. You'd come on here tonight and go, they just like watching Netflix. They really, do you understand what I'm saying? I think we tend to want to look at it and make sweeping judgments about who these kids are, and we tend to then simplify it into a monolith, and that is the first step in misunderstanding and misrepresenting what they actually do. I liked much more what you talked about when you broke them down and they started talking to you as individuals. It's maybe when we have to take the reality of their lives and make them into data that we go wrong. Is that possible?
I think so, but in each generation does have kind of a central identity. So, for example, Gen Xers, okay, we were, in terms of politics and ideology, split relatively the same, as many as conservatives, as liberals, Republicans, as Democrats, whereas this generation is different. The reason that this generation is different, and this is important, that no generation since the greatest generation has dealt with more chaos, more trauma, more quickly than Gen Z. All of this at their footsteps before the age of 25. Listen to me.
No, that's completely not true.
Great. When
I was growing up, Martin Luther King was killed, John F. Kennedy was killed, Robert Kennedy was killed, the Vietnam War was on, and then there was Watergate.
And we put someone on the moon, and we came together for that. This generation.
But that didn't negate all the other shit.
It did not. And every generation has their trauma.
Yes.
But this generation hasn't seen America at our best.
No.
When was the last time your kids felt good about being American and connected to everybody?
This morning.
Really?
Yeah, again, this is the kind of generalization that I think I take issue with. That idea that, like, this generation has had challenges in a way that no one else has. I just think that's putting upon them a sense of victimhood that is not necessarily, and I think can ultimately have them play into that identity, as opposed to saying, yeah, man, your perspective is this is the worst the world has ever been. But I'm going to tell you something. The world is hard, and it's horrible sometimes, and it spins out of control. And all we can do is fight every day to make the world more look like the one that you want it to be. But to treat them as though they have faced some kind of condition that is so anathema to everything that all these other generations have faced doesn't feel real to me.
I didn't say more than all other generations.
Well, you said since the greatest generation.
And the difference, though, is without seeing America united. The difference between a millennial, in my view, and a Gen Zer is a millennial remembers September 11th and September 12th and 13th. For that period of time when we came together, a red county and a blue county, hung the flag, we came together.
It's like a day.
It was a short period of time. But this generation doesn't understand that. And it's been division after division. And it would be easy for them, in my opinion, to not engage in politics, not try to work with other people to try to
But how much of that
this.
is a fiction? How much of that is imposed upon them through the algorithm and through the media, that somehow, we were just talking about this. A young woman in the audience said, how do you remain hopeful? And I said, the way I remain hopeful is to separate the world that you read about and hear about on the news and in the algorithm from the world that you experience as a human being every day. And aren't we, by creating these data points of the horror that they all live in, like, yeah, it sucks to have shooter drills, but we had nuclear war drills where we hid under desks.
Right.
And I didn't know that much about the atomic bomb, but I was pretty sure my desk wouldn't help. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
So we create this mythology around these things that is part of that separation.
But there's nothing seeing children slaughtered in schools. We didn't see a nuclear war. Is not mythology.
But we were seeing in Vietnam, we are,
and we are seeing that. But what I'm telling you is, listen, there's elements of this I agree, and we collectively should be putting this into context for people.
Yes.
It does stress them out. I agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with that. But what I'm saying is that we don't have to agree that, but we just have to understand the way that they feel and where they're coming from, and help them. Help themselves and help us. That's all. That's my message. And these issues are real, because we could work a summer job as an intern or cutting grass and afford a 4-year 1 year tuition, a public or private university. We could do that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Young people can't do that today. Okay, you could work a one job and afford a house. These are the rights. Not only is this generation losing reproductive health care from the Supreme Court, but this is a generation who feels like they're losing other rights. The rights to attend a college without going broke if you work hard, right? The rights to own a home or piece of property. Right. Those are the rights. And
but isn't that a different conversation? Isn't that?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's about an it's not. Listen, young people live in the same economy that we all live in, and I would look at it like, sometimes we'll think like, I happen to be in an unbelievably fortunate situation, but I look at the crunch that people feel, just as they get into middle age after having worked for so long, and they just get to that college age where they're putting their kids through college, their parents start to need help. And you're in that crazy squeeze. But separating that through generations isn't that losing the overall thread economically?
No, there is clearly economic stress around all Americans right now.
Right.
Listen, before we did this survey...
Do we really need to talk to the Gen Z anymore?
Before that, right?
Don't we know enough already? I watch the TikTok. It's everywhere. Do you think social media has hurt them?
Unquestionably, it's hurt them.
Really?
Yeah, it's hurt them.
What would you do to ameliorate this feeling that Gen Z is having, or has it helped them organize, and so you wouldn't lose it because it's a double-edged?
It's certainly some pros to it. I mean, there are folks who feel vulnerable who can find community on that space where they can't find in their own community, and that's good, right? They can organize from it. But the degree to which fear is instilled in their lives, I was talking the other day in terms of what people are anxious about, and a lot of young men I talk to have feeds every morning of car crashes, like horrible, horrible car crashes in their TikTok, Instagram feeds where they're concerned about driving to work. The economic fears about...
Wait, what?
Yeah, like in terms of the algorithms, right?
Oh, it just feeds them car crashes?
It feeds car crashes to them. It feeds car crashes to them.
How the does that even start?
That's just kind of one example.
Can I tell you, all I get is that one girl going, I'm 2 days into college and I'm 3 lectures behind, and then it's just 1,000 people dancing to that.
That's you. That's your algorithm, right? They found you.
I'm doing it wrong. Thank you very much for coming by. Harvard's Jon Della Volpe.